The 80s was probably one of the wildest automobile eras, with several brands trying out a new set of wheels just to stay on top of the market. Today, a lot of these cars are almost totally worthless, with a few valued at just a couple $1,000, far below what you might expect from some of these names. In today's video, let's check out 15 expensive cars of the 80s whose value has dropped off a cliff. To start with, let's talk about the 1982 Jaguar XJS Coupe. Powered by a 5.3-liter V12, it produced roughly 295 horsepower, which actually wasn't bad for a V12 from the 1980s. Sadly, the big issue was that the owner's relationship with this car would be a super rocky one. The V12 engine, while being silky smooth, demanded a lot of TLC. Try skipping regular maintenance, and you'd be dealing with a great deal of overheating or some seriously expensive repairs. Rust loved this car, with everything from the front wings and rear wheel arches to the floor pans basically serving as rust magnets. Then there were the tech features. While the XJS was actually really advanced for the 80s, electrical gremlins often caused headaches for the owners. Even worse was the amount paid to have it fixed. Today, the XJS is a bit of a classic car, with decent ones going for around $8,000 to $10,000, which is quite a shock for a failed piece of Jaguar history. The 1982 Ford Mustang, better known as the Fox Body Mustang, is one of those cars that creates quite the debate between enthusiasts. Some say it has potential, while others are just hell-bent on its problems. Let's see why it's such a mixed bag. To start with, the 2.3-liter four-cylinder engine wasn't exactly impressive, producing just 88 horsepower. Even the famous 5.0-liter V8, the one everyone sees as the real Fox body, only produced 200 horsepower at its best. Then there were the reliability issues: oil leaks, worn-out transmission synchros, and failing heater cores. Today, you can pick up a Fox body Mustang for as little as $2,000 to $3,000. Considering that it's an 80s icon with quite the reputation, it might just be worth it. The Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow 2, made between 1977 and 1980, came with a massive 6.75-liter V8 that produced about 190 horsepower and 290 pounds-per-foot of torque. Being a luxury car, no one really expected much speed from it. Still, there were complaints. The most common issue with this Rolls-Royce was its incredibly advanced hydraulic suspension and braking system. While it gave the car its famous smoothness, it often required a good number of repairs. Then there was rust. Rolls-Royces aren't meant to rust. Slowly, the Silver Shadow became one heck of a rust bucket, and in only a few years, it lost its face in the luxury car market. You can still find these cars today, all with a price tag of at least $19,750. But for a Rolls-Royce, that's a shockingly low price. The 1983 Volkswagen Golf GTI from the Mark II generation was designed to be the car with the perfect blend of fun, sportiness, and style. It had a 1.8-liter four-cylinder engine that produced around 110 horsepower, which was a reasonable amount of power considering the car's relatively small size. Strangely though, it wasn't exactly anyone's favorite. You see, during the 80s, most folks in the US were all about bigger cars. They wanted spacious interiors and huge trunks, and the GTI, being a compact two-door hatchback, was the exact opposite. On top of that, it soon developed some not-so-manageable issues. Owners often found themselves dealing with electrical issues like a faulty window switch and dead gauges. Today, the Mark II GTI is something of a cult classic among car enthusiasts, selling for around $15,000. On the low end, though, you might find one for as little as $1,922. Yeah, it's that cheap. The 1985 Mazda RX-7, or 2nd Gen FC, was Mazda's shot at making a real sports car with a bit of a twist: a rotary engine. Its base model was a 1.3-liter 13B rotary engine that delivered 146 horsepower, with the Turbo 2 version pushing it up to 182. It actually gave off Porsche 924 vibes with its sport look, but like other cars on this list, it came with a couple of problems. That rotary engine, while being innovative, had a reputation for blowing apex seals, which were actually difficult to repair, especially after you've lost compression. Plus, the car had this habit of rusting in the rear wheel wells, especially under the storage bins. Today, an FCRX-7 could go from $4,000 to $5,000 depending on how well it's been taken care of. The next generation of the FCRX-7, the FDRX-7, would be a much better choice. The late 80s Jeep Wrangler YJ was designed to be a big step away from the previous CJ series, especially with its off-road abilities. It came with a few engine options, including a 2.5-liter four-cylinder and a 4.2-liter inline-six, both of which didn't lag on performance. Yet even with its rugged look, the YJ had quite a number of problems. Owners often complained about the starter motor not working properly, and on top of that, there were the annoying oil leaks and inaccurate fuel gauge readings. Another thing was the YJ square headlights, which totally broke Jeep's usual round design. And then there was the oddly positioned windshield wiper. Even with all these odd features, the YJ was a huge deal, with almost 700,000 units sold during those years. Today, you'll find a decent one for around $4,000 to $5,000. Before you make the payment, just make sure to check for these issues. like its rust tendencies. The 1982 Ford Mustang GT was part of the third-generation Fox body lineup and still holds a special spot in car history. For the engine, it used a 5.0-liter high-output V8 that produced 157 horsepower and could hit a top speed of around 118 miles per hour, which was pretty okay. Unfortunately, owning one wasn't always smooth sailing. The cars had a good amount of issues, one of which was oil leaks from the rear main seal and the really difficult door lock actuators. The heater cores were also another weak spot, especially in colder months. Today, you can buy one for anywhere between $4,000 and $5,000, though if you find a really clean one, you could pay a bit more. Not too bad a price for a car that once carried the well-known GT badge. Now let's talk about the Pontiac Firebird's 1982 makeover that was intended to shake things up after the Smokey and the Bandit days of the late 70s. With its plastic-heavy bodywork, pop-up headlights, and glass hatchback, it really was a lovely vehicle, and it even featured as kit in Knight Rider. But let's be real, if we take out the flashing lights, turbo boost, and a snarky British voice, the Firebird would be a disgrace to the muscle car industry. The base model came with the Iron Duke engine that pushed out a very small 90 horsepower, and with its cheap interior, iffy reliability, and handling issues, it just wasn't the best of a Pontiac. Sales didn't even set any records as there weren't many buyers like Pontiac had hoped. Today you can buy one for about $3,500 to $5,000, which isn't too bad for a car with a bit of a quirky history. Let's check out the car that was once the underdog of the classic car world, the late 80s Porsche 944 Turbo. It was Porsche's attempt to break away from their usual cars and go for a wider audience. The 944 Turbo carried a 2.5-liter inline-4 engine that delivered 220 horsepower, and with a Turbo S model, that number jumped to 250. Pretty impressive on paper, but there was something just really off with it, even to die-hard Porsche fans. Well, it all came down to its design. The 944 Turbo had a front-engine rear-wheel drive layout, a big shift for a brand known for its gorgeous rear-engine setups like the 911. And then there were the quirks, timing belt failures, oil leaks, and the out-of-style pop-up headlights and fog lights that just made it seem unusually aged. Today, the 944 Turbo goes for around $25,000, which isn't too bad for regular cars, but is a big-time damage to Porsche's image. Another car that really lost its value was the 1980s Mercedes-Benz 300 SL, the alleged successor to the legendary 1954 300 SL Gullwing. Sadly, these two cars didn't exactly share the same glorious genes. The 300 SL used a 3.0-liter inline-6 that produced 228 horsepower, which wasn't bad in theory, unless it's compared to the 500 SL's 322 horsepower V8. As for reliability, let's just say it wasn't the car's strong suit. From EHA valve failures to convertible tops that wouldn't open and non-functional speedometers, you just know it's one heck of a bad car. You can get a 300 SL for around $7,000 to $8,000 today, which is crazily cheap compared to the original Gullwing, which can go for more than $1 million at auction. Made between 1980 and 1985, the second-generation Cadillac Seville was Cadillac's attempt to make the dream car for a younger crowd. The car was designed by the renowned Bill Mitchell, making it his last design at GM, and Cadillac had high hopes for it. Unfortunately, there was a huge problem with the car's 6.0-liter V8 6.4 engine. Rather than helping the car be more efficient with fuel, it became well known for breaking down pretty easily and even costing more on fuel. It literally did the opposite of what it was meant for. Then there were Seville's technical issues. Cadillac tried working up the engine management system, but it only backfired and caused the car to run erratically. On top of that, the build quality wasn't consistent, poor paint jobs, electrical problems, and even a whole bunch of recalls. Today, the Seville is priced way below $10,000 and is probably a reminder to Cadillac that even the best ideas may not be so practical in real life. When the Chevrolet Corvette C4 debuted in 1984, it did make waves with its looks and tech features. Like, come on, an electronic dashboard with digital displays in 1984? Unfortunately, with any major redesign comes major bumps. The early C4 models used a V8 engine called the L83 Crossfire, which put out 205 horsepower. While that seemed like a lot, it was nowhere near the power of a sports car. Going from 0 to 60 was just a hellish 8 seconds, which for a sports car would not be thrilling. Even though the 1984 Corvette had a solid first year and sold over 51,000 units, it didn't quite keep up the momentum as its reputation suffered from a heavy burn. Today, you could buy a C4 Corvette for around $8,000 to $10,000. If there was one car that was just one heck of a shocking disappointment, it would be the 1982 to 1992 Chevrolet Camaro. Its 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine, nicknamed the Iron Duke, only had around 90 horsepower on its tail. For a muscle car, that's a big-time letdown. So Chevrolet thought the Z28 version, with its 5.0-liter V8, which had 215 horsepower on it, would have been a much better option. Sadly, it actually wasn't. The Camaro was actually really underpowered. and the Z28, even with its alleged 215 horsepower, was relatively powerless when compared to, say, a Honda Odyssey minivan. That's like saying a 2015 Bugatti Veyron wasn't as powerful as a 1970s Ford Pinto. Collectively, this problem, alongside others that came in later, significantly slashed the value of the Camaro, making it worth only around $3,500 today. The Mazda MX-5 Miata, produced between 1990 and 1997, was a head-turner with its 1.6-liter inline-4 engine that produced 116 horsepower. That may not sound like much, but if you consider the car's lightweight and small size, I think it's a good number. In fact, Mazda later bumped it up to a 1.8-liter engine with 133 horsepower. Now for the elephant in the room, the early short-nose crank issue. This was a headache for some owners, especially because if the timing belt wasn't replaced correctly, the crankshaft could fail. Aside from this, the Miata wasn't too bad. The interior was really simple, nothing too fancy, nor were there any high-maintenance materials. It had everything you needed and focused on making the drive fun and engaging. It was actually loved, with the Mazda selling around 400,000 of these beauties in less than a decade. Today, first-gen Miatas are still incredibly popular, selling for around $4,000 to $5,000. With over 410,000 units sold in the US alone, it's safe to say it left its mark in the car market, reigning for more than a decade even though its price was very low. Finally, let's talk about the Alfa Romeo Spider Graduate, which was made from 1983 to 1990. Alfa Romeo designed this car with college grads in mind, cutting down on some of the higher-end qualities in the Spider series, but keeping the same 2.0-liter twin-cam engine as they always had. Producing about 115 horsepower, the engine wasn't quite the best, not what you'd expect from an Alfa Romeo. As cool as the Spider Graduate looked, it came with a backpack of problems. The 2.0-liter engine was pretty sluggish, so if you're expecting to get wind in your hair, well, you'd be really disappointed. And then there were the headaches on its reliability, like troubles with the starter motor, oil leaks, and even fuel gauge errors. Currently, the 1990 Alfa Romeo Spider Graduate isn't exactly a top deal in the car market, averaging around $14,300 if for sale. That's a wrap for today's video. If you liked it, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to stay updated on all our newest content. Catch you in the next one.